White House floats no back pay for some furloughed federal workers despite 2019 law. President Trump spoke to reporters in the Oval Office on Tuesday. President Trump is floating the possibility that some of the roughly 600,000 furloughed federal workers could be denied back pay once the government reopens. Despite 2019 law intended to ensure federal employees are compensated after a shutdown. Speaking in the Oval Office on Tuesday, Trump appeared to publicly back a draft White House memo that includes an argument for denying workers pay. I would say it depends on who we're talking about, Trump said. I can tell you this. The Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we will take care of them in a different way. When pressed on the legality of such a move, Trump said, "What the law says is correct, and I follow the law." Trump was responding to questions about a draft memo from the Office of Management and Budget, which was first reported by Axios and confirmed by a senior White House official not authorized to discuss the memo, which has not been publicly circulated. The fight over federal worker pay is the latest salvo in the Trump administration's efforts to force Democrats to vote for a clean continuing resolution and drop their demands to extend health care subsidies for millions of Americans. The memo's legal argument contradicts guidance issued by the Office of Personnel Management and the wording of a 2019 law signed by Trump during his first term that explicitly guarantees that federal workers shall be paid when the shutdown ends, whether they were furloughed or continued working. The Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019, a bipartisan law enacted after the 35-day shutdown in 2018, added language to the Anti-Deficiency Act that automatically applies back pay to federal employees for any lapse in appropriations that begins on or after December 22, 2018. Previously, Congress had to approve retroactive funding after a shutdown with new legislation. The White House memo notes a clause in the text that says workers shall be paid at the earliest date possible after the lapse in appropriations ends, regardless of the scheduled pay dates, and subject to the enactment of appropriations acts ending the lapse, and argues that this means congressional action is required to enact back pay. Guidance published by the Office of Management and Budget on September 30th did include a reference to the law's automatic restoration pay. The Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019 provides that upon enactment of appropriations to end a lapse, both furloughed and accepted employees will be paid retroactively as soon as possible after the lapse ends, regardless of the scheduled pay dates. The September 30 memo reads, "Additional guidance for agencies on implementing Public Law 116.1 and treatment of pay and leave is available from OPM." A version updated on October 3rd removes those paragraphs. The draft memo is the latest in the multi-pronged pressure campaign from the White House seeking to punish Democrats during the shutdown, including efforts to cancel grant funding for energy projects and hold up transportation funding in states that did not vote for Trump in 2024. The administration has also threatened widespread reduction in force efforts at federal agencies, which have so far not materialized. Congress responds. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, told reporters that while he isn't extensively familiar with the plan and hasn't discussed it with the White House, it is possible there may be a legal justification for the draft. There are legal analysts who think that is not something the government should do, Johnson said. If that is true, that should turn up in the urgency and the necessity of the Democrats doing the right thing there. The top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Patty Murray, argued that any interception with withhold back pay was lawless. They're plotting to try and rob furloughed federal workers of back pay at the end of this shutdown, Murray, in remarks on the Senate floor. This flies in the face of the plain text of the law, which could not be more clear. Government agency furloughs. The numbers reflect temporary furloughs during the government shutdown, as detailed in agency shutdown contingency plans. The government shutdown is snarling air travel. Officials say it could get worse. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy speaks during a press conference at Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey on Monday. Travelers across the U.S. are beginning to feel the impacts of the government shutdown, as air travel control staffing shortages disrupt flights across the country. A dozen Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) facilities saw staffing shortages on Monday, according to an evening advisory from the agency. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy held a press conference at one of them, Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey, where he blamed the nationwide delays on a slight tick up in sick calls by an air traffic control workers. Duffy said controllers are concerned about working without pay during the shutdown, with some considering taking on second jobs, like calling in sick to drive for Uber. And he warned that disruptions could worsen until the government reopens. If we see there's issues in the towers that are affecting controllers' ability to effectively control the airspace, we'll reduce the rate, and you'll see more delays, or you might see a cancellation. Duffy said, "I'm willing to do that before we're willing to risk anyone's life in the air." In a statement shared with NPR, the FAA says it slows traffic into some airports to ensure safe operations. When there are increased staffing shortages, it directs travelers to its website for real-time flight impacts for every U.S. airport. Politicians on both sides of the aisle are blaming each other for the shutdown and the ensuing travel snafus. The government shut down on October 1st after partisan disagreements, largely over healthcare subsidies, prevented the Senate from passing a funding bill. Air traffic controllers played a key role in ending the last government shutdown, which stretched on for 35 days, from December 2018 to January 2019. Only an FAA described a slight increase in sick leave at 2 air traffic control facilities threw major East Coast airports into chaos. and increased pressure on the Trump administration to ultimately reach a spending deal with Congress. Long-standing controller staffing shortages, exacerbated by insufficient hiring, extensive training timelines, and high dropout rates, have remained a problem in the years since. As Monday's events show, even a small number of sick calls can make a big impact. Which airports are affected? According to FAA, Monday's delays affected airspace across the country, including Phoenix, Denver, Chicago, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. The airports in New York and Denver both saw ground delays due to staffing issues, according to the FAA. Flights were delayed on average of 53 minutes out of New York and 39 minutes out of Denver, though some were held up by closer to 2 hours. Perhaps the biggest disruptions were felt at Hollywood Burbank, near Los Angeles, which saw average ground delays of 2.5 hours. It had no air traffic controllers for over 5 hours on Monday, according to California Governor Gavin Newsom. Newsom blamed President Trump in a tweet, writing, "Burbank Airport has 0 air traffic controllers from 4:15 p.m. to 10 p.m. today because of your government shutdown." The Hollywood Burbank Airport Traffic Control Tower in Burbank, California, had no personnel for a 5-hour window on Monday. A different aviation control facility, Southern California TRACON, ran operations remotely from San Diego during that period. Burbank Airport has not responded to NPR's request for comment. It said in a Monday night tweet that its operations were continuing and urged travelers to check with their airlines about possible disruptions. What are air traffic controllers saying? At Duffy's Newark press conference, Nick Daniels, the president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, specifically steered clear of politics as he called for an end to the shutdown. "We need to bring this shutdown to a close so that the Federal Aviation Administration and the committed aviation safety professionals can put this distraction aside and focus completely on their vital work," Daniels said. NATCA, which represents more than 20,000 air traffic controllers, says many of its members were already working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the shutdown has put them under further strain by furloughing safety support staff and suspending support programs. Its website has a notice warning its members that participating in a job action could result in removal from federal service, saying such behavior is not only illegal, but also undermines NATCA's credibility. In a statement to NPR, NATCA, nearly 11,000 fully certified controllers remain on the job, and it is normal for a few of them to call in sick on any given day. But it also says Monday's events underscore the fragility of the country's aviation system and the urgent need to accelerate training and hiring. Since the start of the second Trump administration, Duffy has pushed for an overhaul in the country's air traffic control systems, part of which still rely on floppy disks and run Windows 95, and prioritized efforts to supercharge hiring. Duffy said Monday that the shutdown hampers those efforts now and potentially in the future. It has a long-lasting impact on our ability to make up on the ground in the shortages that we have right now with air traffic controllers. He said this is having great impact on our system at a time when we're trying to reduce the stress. The view of the FAA air traffic control tower from Newark Liberty International Airport Monday, as staffing shortages prompted flight delays there and at several other airports. How else could the shutdown affect air travel? The government shutdown could also have steep consequences for rural airports. Duffy warned that the Essential Air Service, a federal program that subsidizes commercial service to rural airports in about 170 U.S. communities, could run out of funding as soon as Sunday. Every state across the country will be impacted by the inability to provide the subsidies to airlines to service these communities, Duffy said, adding that Alaska will be the hardest hit. The White House proposed slashing the program's funds by more than 50% earlier this year, despite the fact that it has long-standing bipartisan support in Congress. As Duffy himself acknowledged on Monday, Natasha Marquez, a spokesperson for the Regional Airline Association, told NPR in a statement that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the EAS supported more than 17,000 U.S. jobs and enabled the operation of hundreds of daily flights from airports with an average distance of 200 miles from the nearest medium or large hub airport, meaning many travelers could feel the impacts. A spokesperson for Alaska Airlines, which holds contracts for 6 communities in Alaska, told NPR over the email that if the government shutdown continues beyond Sunday, we would be relieved of our obligations as an EAS provider to those communities, and the Department of Transportation would likely suspend reimbursements. It is not immediately clear when passengers would notice a change. Airlines typically seek reimbursement from the government at the start of the month for the previous month's flights, according to the Department of Transportation. Change is brewing in the coffee industry. What lies ahead? A man harvests coffee in Rio de Janeiro state, Brazil, on July 21st. Much of the coffee in the U.S. comes from Brazil. Coffee growers are dealing with a lot right now. Most immediately, the Trump administration's tariffs, which threaten their sales, add to the ongoing challenge of pests and diseases for coffee production. In the longer term, experts say the coffee industry can't continue with business as usual. Growers face a waning labor force, and the areas where coffee can reliably grow are poised to shrink dramatically. While your morning cup isn't going away anytime soon, it could become more expensive and could taste different too. In honor of International Coffee Day on October 1st, we are taking stock of the world of coffee. And what to expect in the years to come. Climate change is shrinking in the land where coffee can grow. Due to the effects of climate change, the land suitable for coffee farming could shrink by 50% by 2050. According to a 2014 study, the analysis found that highly productive areas in the two largest coffee producing countries in the world, Brazil and Vietnam, may become unsuitable for coffee in the future. Much of the coffee in the US comes from Brazil. If you're fond of specialty coffee, it could have come from Colombia, Central America, or Ethiopia. Ethiopia, for example, could see a 21% loss of coffee growing area with warming temperatures, according to researchers. Climate change is the top problem facing coffee production regions, says Sarah Moroki, the founder and CEO for coffee consulting company Vuna. She works with farmers who face rising temperatures, erratic rainfall patterns, floods, and droughts. Arabica is the main variety of coffee sold in the U.S. It grows at a higher elevations, typically 1,200 meters above sea level or higher. But as the planet is heating up, some of the lower elevation areas where Arabica used to grow very well, it's just not ideal anymore. Moroki says, farmers are having a plant even higher the mountains to escape the heat. Jeremy Hager, a professor of agroecology at the University of Greenwich, who has spent decades researching coffee in Central America, says temperature isn't the only concern related to climate change. Drought is a big one. Coffee is, I would say, quite a resilient crop. He says it does grow under quite a range of climate conditions, but obviously there are limits to that. He says 1 year in Nicaragua, the dry season was extra long and he saw the whole system start to collapse. The coffee plants were defoliating. The trees planted to give shade and shield the coffee from the heat of the sun started to die as well. With climate change making weather more unpredictable, Moroki says the threats to coffee production are only going to get worse. It's just a miracle that we still have plants producing coffee, she says. Coffee farmers are in a bind. There are steps farmers can take to mitigate some effects of climate change, such as planting more shade trees and diversifying crops. But they often can't afford to do so. In many countries, coffee farmers often live at or below the poverty line. And on top of that, the price of coffee set on the international market is variable, and it doesn't take into account the cost of production. Farmers need to plan far ahead, as coffee plants can take a few years to bear fruit, which is hard to do when you don't know what the price of coffee will be in a few years, Hager said. High fertilizer prices, increased wage costs, or the impacts of climate extremes, new pests and diseases, all of those things require investment, he says. Financial pressures and migration and harsh working conditions are also leading to shortages of farm workers. Farmers are getting older, and younger generations don't want to carry on the business when they see their parents struggling to get by, Moroki says. You look at the livelihoods, and you're not surprised that their children decided to leave the rural areas and go to the city and try something else. Experts NPR spoke to say the way coffee is sold on the international market prevents many farmers from having a decent standard of living, even when coffee prices are at their highest. Farmers often don't see enough of a profit to stay afloat. Muroki says many farmers today are stuck in the cycle of production and extraction that they can't get off. The situation today has roots in slavery and colonialism, experts say, when European powers enslaved Africans to work on tropical tree plantations. Sean Simon, a coffee scientist and consultant with Coffee Consulting, says that in coffee growing countries, their products have never been about them growing it for their peers. The products have always been really cheap and at the expense of the standard of living of those people. With the amount of labor involved, from growing, processing, and drying to shipping across the world and then roasting, it's crazy how cheap it is, says Muroki. It was never meant to be cheap, and it was never meant to be mass consumed by us. The flavors of the future. Coffee producers have no immediate plans to move away from Arabica. Coffee experts said, but researchers are already planning for what comes next as temperatures increase. The coffee world has been buzzing about recent research into a lesser-known coffee species called Cynophila. It's been found in Sierra Leone and can tolerate hotter temperatures than Arabica, and notably has a similar taste. Hager, who has researched Cynophila, says it's being tested for how it grows and can be cultivated. Most domesticated crops have undergone decades, if not centuries, of selection for higher performing materials. And we're obviously only just at the start of that, he says. Researchers also plan to study how it could be crossbred with other coffee species. Cynophila production would also need the economical for production and be scaled up, or else it could remain a niche product. He says, two other little-known coffee varieties, Exella and Liberica, are also experiencing a renewed interest due to their climate resilience. They're being grown in a handful of countries, and Robusta, the second most grown coffee variety in the world, is gaining ground on Arabica from about 25% of global production in the early 1990s to more than 45% today. It has origins in sub-Saharan Africa, and today Vietnam is the biggest producer. Arabica drinkers may consider Robusta to have a bitter and earthy taste. It's less expensive to grow and is often used in instant coffee. But some coffee growing areas are switching from Arabica to Robusta because it can better withstand higher temperatures. Andres Montenegro, Sustainability Director of the Specialty Coffee Association, a trade association for the independent coffee shops, thinks there's potential for Robusta to capture some Arabica drinkers if marketed well. We're seeing more innovations in Robusta processing to improve flavor. He says, with consumers being aware of that and paying premium prices for those new Robusta beans. Another option that would gain steam in a synthetic coffee, which is made without beans, a synthetic espresso currently on the market, made of date seeds and other plant-based ingredients, tastes just like the real thing, according to one reporter's taste test. Arabica will still be available for many years to come, and farmers are finding ways to adapt in the short term. But coffee drinkers will also need to adapt, says Steinman. As more varieties become mainstream, we need to broaden our horizon of what the taste experience can be.